opening lines for kingside expansion, aiming to fianchetto the bishop and contest central influence subtly. Mirroring white's flank pawn advance, black prepares to fianchetto their bishop, aiming for long-range influence. Establishing diagonal influence, this bishop now eyes the long diagonal, controlling key squares and preparing for future central pawn advances. Developing the bishop here prepares to castle and creates a beautiful diagonal for future pressure. Presents an open diagonal for the bishop while solidifying central control and preparing for castling. Boldly challenging the center, e5 immediately injects tension and opens diagonals, preparing development for the queenside. Securing the king in the corner unleashes development, preparing to contest the center with piece play. The knight retreats, solidifying the center and preparing for kingside expansion, but it delays the pawn storm's arrival. Asserting central influence, white immediately stakes a claim on the d5 square, preparing to expand on the queenside. The castling solidifies the king's safety, preparing for potential central pawn breakthroughs. Boldly seizing the center, white immediately challenges black's pawn structure, aiming to open lines for their pieces. Opening the d-file immediately contests white's central pawn and prepares counterplay, creating dynamic tension in the heart of the board. Centralizing the knight immediately opens up avenues for further piece development and challenges black's central control. Boldly challenging white's central presence, this push immediately creates pawn tension and opens lines for counterplay. Capturing the pawn opens the c-file, creating immediate pressure and challenging black's central foothold. Reclaiming the pawn with the knight reestablishes piece harmony, challenging white's central grip and offering dynamic counterplay. Repositioning the knight to the rim often aims to reroute it towards better squares or support a queenside advance. Solidifying the pawn chain, this move prepares to challenge white's central control and potentially develop the queen's knight to a more active square. Knight's repositioning aims to avoid pawn tension and potentially redeploy for central influence or queenside pressure. Repositioning the knight to d7 offers better central support and prepares for a potential pawn push on e5. Unleashing a central pawn thrust, white boldly challenges black's e5 foothold and seeks to broaden their queenside influence, injecting dynamism into the position. Reconnecting the knight to the central action solidifies the pawn chain and prepares for a pawn push on the kingside. Asserting central dominance and preparing a kingside pawn storm, f4 boldly challenges black's equilibrium. Opening the e-file now might allow piece coordination towards the kingside, while also preparing to contest the central tension. Repositioning the rook opens the e-file for future pressure and supports the knight's advance. Seeking to disrupt white's pawn center, black aims to outmaneuver the knight from its restrictive square. This advance injects tension into the center, challenging black's knight and aiming to seize central space. Unpinning the knight allows for potential pawn breaks and frees up the queen. Unleashing the queen to a potentially dynamic square, aiming to coordinate attacks and exert influence over the center. Stepping the knight back preserves its activity, keeping a watchful eye on the weakened kingside dark squares. Dismantling black's bishop's diagonal control frees up space for white's pieces. Developing the bishop to its longest diagonal, this move aims to free the knight while preparing to contest the central dark squares. Unlocking the queenside expansion, white aims to outflank black's central control and open lines for his pieces. Aggressively opening lines risks exposing your king's position significantly. Opening the diagonal for the bishop, this piece now exerts pressure on black's queenside structure while simultaneously preparing for a pawn thrust. Targeting the queen's flank, this move aims to disrupt white's central control and create queenside counterplay. Sacrificing the pawn opens lines, creating a volatile center and forcing black to confront the unleashed fury of white's central pawns and pieces. Recapturing the knight opens a clear path for your own queen to join the fray and challenge white's central occupation. Liberating the dark-squared bishop, This exchange aims to disrupt black's knight structure and seize control of open diagonals. Reclaiming the pawn solidifies central presence, but allows white's bishop to activate aggressively. Launching a pawn storm on the queenside aims to disrupt black's coordinated pieces and potentially seize more open lines for your pieces. Unveiling a central pawn chain, this retreat strategically repositions the queen to escape immediate harassment and prepare for a counterstrike. Securing the central files with this rook repositions for potential pressure on black's weakened pawn structure. Exchanging the rook on the open file forces white to recapture, simplifying the position and potentially opening lines for black's pieces. Recapturing the rook solidifies control of the open file, a crucial element for the upcoming middle game struggle. Re-establishing the rook on its original file simplifies the position, allowing for potential breakthroughs. Reinforcing the queenside pawn structure addresses potential weaknesses, preparing for a more robust defensive setup. Reclaiming the center and preparing a knight sortie to f4 to disrupt white's pawn structure. Repositioning the knight to b3 enhances control over central squares and prepares a potential queenside expansion, while also guarding against pawn advances. Trading rooks opens a crucial e-file and may simplify into a less defended white-king scenario. Recapturing the knight solidifies the central pawn structure and opens a clear path for the king to participate in the action. Re-establishing knight centralization and threatening the weakened kingside pawn structure. Pressing the knight into the advanced outpost offers a potent outpost for piece activity and threatens disruption. A patient regrouping, the bishop retreats to a more robust diagonal, seeking improved activity and potential counterplay against white's somewhat static central pawn structure. Opening up lines for your remaining pieces to coordinate, this intends to exploit the newly created e-file for central influence. Challenging the knight's central influence is a bold attempt to reshape the pawn structure. Prioritizing king's safety with a clear retreat avenue for the monarch becomes paramount now. This move repositions the queen, clearing the e-file for potential rook action while eyeing the kingside. Seeking to pierce black's defenses, white aims to exploit the open diagonal for the bishop and pressure f7. Challenging the knight directly allows for potential pawn structure concessions, weakening the kingside for active piece play. Initiating a knight outpost on the queenside to pressure black's defenses. Pondering a repositioning of the bishop to better contest the central squares and potentially influence the queenside. A bold bid to centralize the queen, aiming to disrupt black's kingside pawns and open lines for attack. Repositioning the knight to g7 seeks safety and prepares to join the queenside defense, but potentially surrenders central influence for a while. Solidifying the center and preparing for potential pawn pushes forward, this maneuver aims to outmaneuver the opponent's knight. Repositioning the knight to eye the weak pawn and potentially swing it to the kingside for defense or attack. Snatching that pawn might create immediate material gain, but it neglects the crucial need for piece development and leaves your king exposed. Focusing the bishop on the kingside offers a subtle threat of infiltration, aiming to disrupt white's defensive structure. Attempting to blockade the critical diagonal is a bold gambit, but it might overextend your knight prematurely. Unleashing the knight to a central outpost can be quite disruptive. Targeting the queenside pawn opens lines, but the king might become exposed. Capturing the pawn initiates a likely queen trade, simplifying into an endgame where black's active rook and knight could pose problems. Capturing the pawn on b7 solidifies white's material advantage and forces black into a passive defense of his remaining queenside structure. Liberating the knight opens up attacking avenues against white's weakened pawn structure. Clearing the path for your king to join the endgame fight after the piece exchange. Bringing the bishop back to its ideal diagonal, this activates a dormant piece and pressures white's exposed pawns. The king ventures out, seeking central activity and potential outpost possibilities in this unfolding endgame. Prioritizing king's safety now anchors black's forces, preparing to contest the central files. Reactivating the king's central influence solidifies white's endgame ambitions. Gaining a foothold in the center with the king provides immediate defensive and offensive options. Probing the king's defenses, this knight's advance forces a critical decision regarding its safety.